Tony Benedict joined Walt Disney Productions' feature animation department in the middle 1950s. He was fresh out of the Marine Corps and new to California, but in short order he was working on Sleeping Beauty and a variety of television projects for the Disneyland TV show. After writing and boarding shorts for UPA, Tony went to work for a newer studio run by animation veterans Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera, and Tony was soon writing scripts for a primetime series called The Flintstones, and also writing and boarding a host of others, titles like Magilla Gorilla and Peter Potamus, and any and all Hanna-Barbera cartoons that rolled down the creative highway during that period. After HB, there were animated features and video games and directing and story editing stints on a wide variety of projects, but Tony looks back on his time with Bill and Joe as one of the pivotal and magical periods in the cartoon business, and today is creating a documentary about it. We spoke in the conference room of the Animation Guild in mid-September 2011. We are here today with Tony Benedict on September 16th, 2011, in the Animation Guild's conference room. Tony, you've been in the biz a real long time. You're one of the grand old veterans. But you're doing a project now about the early days, the glory days of Hanna-Barbera. And could you talk a little bit about this project that you are in the process of producing and creating?
I can. There was a time in this animation business, we used to call it the cartoon business, that was different than any other period. From 1957 to 1967, Hanna-Barbera pretty much owned the animation business. Everyone was working for them because the business had died outside. Disney no longer made shorts and no one else made feature films. So animation people had nowhere to go, and the cost of making these films was more than television revenues could endure.
Right.
So a system was devised by, well, perhaps Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera, although a lot of people contributed. It was a very successful way of making films, and who came up with it, I don't know. It was very successful, and success has 1,000 fathers, and failure is an orphan.
Absolutely.
So, but it was just limiting animation, but they still had great voice talent. You still had great background painters, yet great character designs and great writing. The only thing missing was all that high-cost, overflowing animation, which didn't seem necessary for this kind of animation.
Right.
The characters were funny. It was well written. The dialogue, you could listen to it and laugh at it. So it wasn't dependent on that heavy, flowing, overdone animation. It wasn't necessary. But they used it when they needed it.
Right.
So the television networks and the advertising overlords had no real idea what was going on. They knew that these shows could be made efficiently and inexpensively from their view, and so they just bought them and got them as fast as they could. The more you could put on the air, Bill Hanna was like pumping out as many as he could.
Yeah, it started with Rough and Ready, and it went on from there.
It did. Rough and Ready kicked it off. They said, hey, this is real inexpensive stuff, and it has an audience. So, but there was no such thing as reviews from the advertisers or the networks. Really, they just wanted to get it. So we were writing and making these films, and they would pretty much get on the air the way we had written them.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as a Bible. The characters, we learned about these characters from doing them, and then look at the first few and just kept building those characters. It was there was no reference to who they were and how they would behave.
you were there right from almost the beginning. I mean, you were there at the very, very beginning, but you got there in 61.
1960 I came
Or
there.
1960.
Right, and that was when they had the first network show, Flintstones. And I wrote a Flintstone. That's how I got the job. Actually, I was at UPA, and before UPA, I was at Disney. I had arrived out here in 1956. I drove out here in my old Studebaker, 49 Studebaker, and came from life in the Marine Corps to Walt Disney Studio in 1956.
Was it a culture shock going from the Marine Corps to Disney's?
Yeah, that's a soft way of putting it. It was a wonderful cultural, I don't know if it was cultural, but it was exhilarating. There was, everyone, no one ordered you around. It was sort of a camaraderie. It was nice, and, it was just, and everyone there could draw.
Yeah.
And they were all drawing all the time and working on Sleeping Beauty. I began in traffic and then waiting for an opening in the animation training program, and after I went through that, I got into a unit in G-Wing with Hal Sutherland and Jerry Hathcock and Ed Solomon.
Oh yeah.
And
all the
I
old
was
timers.
doing breakdowns and in-betweens on Sleeping Beauty. But then Bob McRae had a unit that was put together to come up with programming for television. They were actually repurposing. I don't think the phrase originated there, but
right.
That's what
they didn't call it repurposing in those
right.
days.
So, but they would head over to the morgue.
Yeah, they'd head over to the morgue,
and we'd take out whatever material was there, animation, and we would adapt it for the Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color show.
So what kind of stuff were you doing? You were probably doing in-between interstitials and bridging stuff?
Well, the show was written, I forget who was writing up there, but we had David Usher was our liaison, and they would come from upstairs in the story department and come down with and say, we need, Donald Duck in a cornfield. So that we go through all the archives, and sure enough, here's this
Donald Duck
corn
in a
stalks
cornfield.
animating, through a field. Can you imagine all these corn stalks coming at you? And I was in-betweening on those things, and just...
The kernels of corn
Right.
must have been stunning.
But we adapted, we had to clean them up, and then they would reshoot them, ink and paint them, or ink and paint them, shoot them, and then that would go into the program. So they develop a lot of, old feature material, and then we'd bring them back. But it was great flipping through all those wonderful drawings.
You got a real education of all the stuff that had been done over the previous 25 and 30 years.
Getting hands-on, looking at that stuff, and of course, standing the old, the animators would always have the new apprentice behind them, and you'd sit and look over the shoulder, and they would criticize your work or suggest how to improve it, or just watching them. Everyone had to do that. It was long hours, but it was like the old medieval guilds. I think they were just passing on
Learning
this
from the ground
information one-on-one.
Yeah.
So hey, that was great. I loved it. I was totally.
What was the studio like in those days? Because you were talking about the ball fields and the
It was, there was so easy. You could take pictures. I would take stills, and no one ever objected to it. And it wasn't, super crowded. They had a baseball field out there, where the main building is right now on the corner of Alameda and Buena Vista.
Yeah.
And we'd play ball there, and that was very valuable property. But it was enjoyable. We also had at Disney, we had a basketball team.
Yeah.
We played in the Studio League, and we had a theatrical group, and I was in a play there, Sabrina, and they let us use the whole, the whole facilities, the stage. That's a long way from Cherry Point, North Carolina.
Long way from the Marine Corps.
Yeah, so it was a wonderful experience, and I assumed it was like that everywhere, and that it would last and last. But after a while, they cut back, and I got laid off. I didn't even know what that was about. I thought I was going to work forever there, but I went immediately to work over at UPA, and they had a whole different perspective on animation. They didn't follow that the Disney formula. They were trying to do Telltale Heart, things like that. That were
Mr. Magoo and Gerald McBoing Boy.
Right, and they were sharp edge styling, just distinct in every way from a Disney film.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So that was, and I was working as an assistant animator for Eddie Friedman, and Al Wade was there, Jim Fletcher, and some of the other luminaries, Abe Levitot.
Yeah. How was Eddie in those days? Because I knew him much later at Filmation, where he was a director. He was a great guy.
He was, and we were all in one cubicle, and we did a lot of jokes about one another, and I have them all, and that's, one of these days I'm going to, perhaps I'll illustrate it here.
Put them on this.
I might put them on here. Yeah, it's a good place for them. So.
So how long did you stay at?
I was there till for about a year and a half, and then I heard about Hanna-Barbera, and there was a writer at UPA, Phil Babbitt. Yeah. And I had, written a couple of Magoos for them, and they bought it at. And then so Phil told me the Hanna-Barbera was cranking up, and they were going to do the Flintstones and all that, half-hour prime time TV. So Phil and I wrote a story, and I boarded it, and we took it over. Well, he took it. He had an agent.
Now, how did you know what the characters looked like by this time? Because the show had already been out, or?
No, it was I think I didn't board that. No, I didn't board that one. That's right. It was in a script form.
A script form.
But I was making drawings and that would illustrate and that we could submit with it. So it wasn't really a board. And so he took it to Hanna-Barbera and took it to Alan Dinehart, and so bottom line is they hired me but didn't hire Phil because I could draw, and
Phil couldn't.
And so and
thus is the race won by the swift.
Well, it was the nature of cartoons then was you almost had to have some animation training if you wanted to do visual gags.
Sure.
And the Flintstones were like, in the beginning, were all so many visuals, but then there were not enough writers that could also draw and understood animation, so they brought in some excellent writers, guys from the Bilko show and Gleason show.
Oh yeah.
And they were terrific, but they didn't have these Flintstone gags in there, so I spent a lot of time going and inserting these gags for them to supplement it. And whenever they were short, Hannah would ask me if I could give them 2 and 3/4 minutes, practically give me the footage, and I'd have to fill that up.
You'd have to put in enough gags to fill the time.
Yeah, or stretch them out or whatever, make it, and fill that time.
So the Flintstones was your first assignment over at Hanna-Barbera.
It was.
First show that you worked on.
Right.
You step right into the big leagues, primetime television, and that show was a major hit. So.
I know it was, and I think it would have lasted much longer if they had stuck with the. Of course, Bill and Joe didn't really know how things would evolve, but they were into pushing it out fast because the money they made on production was enormous. If they had taken time to keep the jokes up or keep the same quality of the characters, the later Flintstones differed widely from the early ones. But a good example is today's cartoons are like they last. The Simpsons they are as good today as when they first started. They
Right.
just maintain
Well, because they have a big writing staff that
Oh, of course, it requires
polishes and polishes and
Right.
polishes.
But they kept that up, and they understood the value of it back then. If we had done that, if we had like just kept that quality up all the way through, the Flintstones may have
Would have
lasted
gone
as long as
20
the
years.
Simpsons.
Yeah. Well, in a
So-
way, they did because they kept bringing them back for different incarnations. It's not
Yeah,
like
but it was
they've ever really gone away.
right. But the later ones just didn't have the spark. But maybe that's not.
Were you
really-
were you on season 1 or were you on season 2 or you?
I was there in season 1. I don't think I wrote a Flintstone till the second season. We did the first one, the one we sold.
Yeah.
So that
That
was
would have
that
been
one.
season 1, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
And then you wrote subsequent Flintstones
Right.
after that. So how many years did you write on that show? For the whole run?
6 years I was at Hanna-Barbera. 6 straight years. Me and Warren Foster and Michael Maltese. They were in their 60s, and I was like 23.
What was Michael Maltese is such a legend today. What was Mike like?
He was
working beside him?
hilarious. Oh, he was hilarious. Mike and I would have some long conversations. He was, a poor boy in New York, grew up in, in a dysfunctional family, modern term for an old condition, and he came out.
Parents fighting is what
Yeah, and his dad, I guess, was pretty harsh. But he was a pure humorist. Everything was funny.
yeah.
That seemed to be the culture, and Warren was like that. The studio was like that. If you could you get a laugh, then,
Yeah.
and you could communicate that way. You had a better chance of getting a raise from Joe Barbera if you could get a laugh out of him while doing it.
Yeah.
And that was the language of the studio. We all made fun of each other. I would draw Jerry real fat and overweight, and he would draw me real short.
Jerry Eisenberg.
Yeah, Jerry Eisenberg, and we would do EWO and find something in somebody that we could humorize, so to speak. And there wasn't the delicate sensitivities to these subjects that there are now.
Yeah.
And
you took a lot of 8mm film of that whole period, right?
there was zero security, aside from the guard outside, and nobody cared. I was always taking photographs. I've been taking them all my life. I took them at Disney's and same with UPA and at Hanna-Barbera, and I bought the newest cameras. And so I would go around the studio shooting, everybody. It's
Yeah.
silent film, but still they were active, and nobody was shy. Everybody knew me, and you got the whole atmosphere of what a really joyride it was for most of us.
Yeah, I've seen some of that footage. It's hysterical stuff.
Oh yeah, it was great for our basketball team. We had a Hanna-Barbera basketball team. We played Disney. We lost almost every game.
Well,
But
you
yeah.
played for Disney and then you switched and played for Hanna-Barbera, right? So
yeah,
you were
well-
probably playing against some of the guys that you had played for earlier.
I don't remember that any of them were still there. Well, yeah, there was this one guy, right? Blake Todd, who's I think head of audio at Disney.
Yeah. He was
And,
there forever.
And so, yeah, we'd have these great games. We'd play Columbia and Fox would always have these young actors on the team. People out of UCLA, young athletes. Who is the great Olympic athlete of what was his name? Anyway, he was playing basketball for Fox.
That
They had several UCLA actor players. Denny Miller, I think, was one guy who wound up marrying one of Sharon Disney, if my memory is correct. And CBS had Johnny Mathis on their team and Pat Boone. And I have video of that, but I was in the game and my brother was shooting, and there's a soft focus on it. But that's
Yeah, we've encountered that. We did a whole interview here out of focus because we didn't know the camera was out of focus. It looked fine through the viewfinder.
yeah.
Through
that's
the
a-
electronic
that's
viewfinder. We are going to put it up at some point. But to get back to Hanna-Barbera, so were you working on I mean, what shows were you working on? Was your primary focus the Flintstones? Because it was on for 6 seasons, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Were you working on that every season that it was on, or did you move around?
I was a jack of all trades. I would hop from Flintstones to the Jetsons. I'd do some bridges for a Huck show or Yogi show or the Quick Draw McGraw show. You know those little bridges they had in between them. But that's all they needed, because the Quick Draw McGraw was, written entirely by Michael Maltese.
Really?
No one wrote anything, and he did that entire series himself.
And that show was on quite a while, wasn't it?
Right, and it was just brilliant. He could crank out so much stuff, and he boarded them all. They weren't production boards, but you could go to a production board very quickly with them. Yeah, Mike was astonishingly productive. And it was always laughs. Go into his office and...
You do a lot of gag drawings?
Right. We do have a lot of... That's part of this project I'm working on with all the 8mm film that I shot, and all these drawings and gags that I did, that Ewo did, that Jerry Eisenberg did, Tony Segroy did, Corny Cole did some drawings, and Jerry has a huge stack of them.
Yeah.
But he lost many more in the Marvel fire, I think 1980. He lost a lot of them. And even the ones that he's retrieved have these burnt edges on them.
Oh, really?
They're going to be in the films, but I'm cleaning them up in, some of them got water on them.
Photoshopping them to clean them up?
I've been restoring these photographs. Even a lot of Jerry's photographs are, they're old and problems with them, so we restore them. He came up with a wonderful team picture of at MGM. We figure it's somewhere in the 40s, but it's got Bill and Joe and Harvey Eisenberg, Jerry's dad, and Xander, and all the old team from Tom and Jerry show, Dick Vickenbach, and they're all there in this big, huge photograph. It's about this big, and it's very sharp, and so I scanned it in, and you can come in right to the faces, and they're still sharp.
Really?
So, and we do this with a lot of our photographs of that period that Jerry Eisenberg had, in addition to the ones that I have.
And his photographs have survived. They haven't been burned up in any fire.
No, he had them. He had a hard time finding them. We had to, he had to go to his garage and dig through all kinds of things and bring out all his slides and old NIGs, but he had them all properly cataloged, and so I took them.
So in other words, there's quite a visual history of Hanna-Barbera from 1960 to 1967.
Indeed, right. And I see it as like trying to capture, all that fun that we had and the atmosphere.
It's like archaeology. It's basically you're mining all of the visual treasures and the photographs and the film that came out of that. And you were probably the only one shooting 8mm film, weren't you? Was there anybody else doing it?
As far as I know, I'm the only one. Although, of course, a lot of people aren't here any longer, but a lot of people were shooting stills.
Yeah.
And Alex Lovey shot a lot of them. I wish I could. He must have some heirs around. I remember he had some children, but that's one of the things that we're going to do is like pursue even more of it.
Oh, yeah.
Because the more you have, the better you can weave it into a continuity that describes the period properly.
Oh yeah. So, but to get back to the period, so you were working on the Flintstones in each of their 6 seasons, and then you were hopping around on other series as well at the same time. So, what would your day be like? I mean, did you go from series to series in a week, or did you stay with one show for 2 or 3 months and then switch over, or did they say, we need help with this? How did that work?
I would get an assignment. Joe would call me in there and say, all right, well, got any Flintstone ideas? I'm like, yeah, okay, let me come up with something, and I'd go and work something out, just something I could talk about. go in to him, oh yeah, well maybe we can do that, and then he would suggest things and so forth. Okay, go back and start on it. Let's see what it.
But Joe was really the only one you had to pitch. You didn't have to pitch a committee.
No, there was no such thing as a. Yeah, you had to please Joe. He was the only one, and he spoke only to God, so he didn't have to go past that. So
yeah, I've often heard that Joe Barbera spoke to God, and that's where he got his cartoon inspiration.
Oh, he was funny, man. He when I first came there, so I was still all,
Starry-eyed,
impressed by every time I go to a studio, it's like a whole new cool thing, and everybody is, there's no, if there were conflicts, I was oblivious to them, and I'm sure there must have been. It's the nature of life. But for me, I just blew by them all because I was on a ride and having great fun. Joe, I remember before I wrote the first Flintstone, he took me over to his big palatial, somewhere in the hills, maybe, I don't know.
His house.
Yeah, and it was like, I'd never seen a huge place like that.
He lived in Bel Air, didn't he? Or
in the end,
Hills?
he lived in Bel Air, right. But I think this one was maybe up in the Hollywood Hills, and he had a big pool, and we all sat around. He would have some food, which is him and I, and we were like working on this story.
Yeah.
But I was enjoying myself. This is really,
It's a Hollywood high life.
Yeah, is it going to be like this forever? And so
there's a quick answer to that. No, it's not like that forever.
Yeah,
it's only like that until it's not like that anymore.
Yeah, right. I didn't know that then, fortunately, but it lasted until 1967, though, for me, and that whole period was great. Yeah, so I worked more with Joe than Bill, and
well, Joe was the story guy, the idea guy, and
right.
Bill was the production guy, right?
Yeah,
that's what everybody is told.
Right, but Bill was a superb music man. He had a degree in music, and he understood. That's why all the timing, he did all the timing.
Yeah.
That's intensely creative. He made those Tom and Jerry's hum because of the way he paced that music.
Yeah.
I used to go to theaters when I was a little boy and laugh my ass off at those Tom and Jerry cartoons.
There was a reason they won all those Academy Awards.
Yeah, it was. But all that stuff led up to, you can see those same stories and gags and everything in the later cartoons that are on TV.
Yeah, well, that's what you were telling me earlier, that Mike Maltese and Joe and Bill, they knew all the gold from 20 and 30 years before. So
they had been making these films for many years, and they all came from, Bill didn't, but Joe and Warren and Mike were all from New York.
Yeah.
So was Harvey Eisenberg, who was a early friend of Joe, knew him very early when they were both doing comics back in New York. So they all had that New York sense of humor, the Eastern thing, the Bill going Gleason and that kind of thing. But they also knew all the visual gags. They had a vaudeville comedy, the visual style that vaudeville had. They had all those old jokes from there, and I used to ask you, Mike, where do you get all this stuff? And he said, that's old stuff. We've been telling these jokes for 50 years. I used to do it out there.
Just keep plugging them in where appropriate.
Yeah, right, and they're easily updated, to fit, change a word here and there, and it fits into a modern text.
And then, so you're there, humming right along, the studio's doing well. And then what happened in 66, 67 to where it changed a bit? What happened there?
The suits came marching in. Finally, the advertisers realized that there was this, incredible
goldmine,
profit center that, they could exploit. And so they came in and the rules changed. It became more of an advertising medium than it was an entertainment show.
Creative medium.
And, so that's business. You have to accept it. I've never accepted it. It was too late for me. I'd already, I've learned that we worked alone. We weren't a team. Mike worked in his room, I worked in my room, Warren worked in his room. We didn't bounce it off anybody but Joe.
Right.
And it worked that way. Now it's quite different. And
You've got screening committees, you've got focus groups, you've got all kinds of stuff that goes on. Little kids, they show it to little kids.
It's like
they test it and test it and test it.
Right. Whereas an artist doesn't need to test. Hey, you like this tune? You play it.
Put it out.
Yeah, and they say, wow, yeah. Oh, what kind of marketing research did you do on that? Yeah.
So how did the studio change? You were there straight through from 1960 to 1967.
Right.
How did the studio change? Because you told me that in 1967, Joe and Bill sold the place.
Yeah, I believe they sold it first to Taft Broadcasting out of Ohio.
Yeah.
And Bill has said many times to lots of people that they sold out way too soon. And he regretted that. But
it seemed like good money at the time.
Well, I suppose it was, if he could have looked further ahead. But the Disney example should have been pretty obvious to him that,
they could
keep the standards up and to last much longer, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's what slowed things down. It really was when you go, you have to satisfy the advertisers, then, it's not your product anymore. But it still can be incredibly profitable, and so who was to object?
So did you stay beyond 67 when they sold the place?
No, just about the same time. We all knew that it was, coming, but...
the buzz around the studio was they were going to sell the
yeah, and that, changed the whole nature of the place. But I had, about the same time, written a potential television special, a children's television special.
Right.
And I even boarded it all up, and Iwo Takamoto helped me. He designed some characters for me and did some background. It just was a big help on it. And I took it to Joe and pitched it, and he passed on it.
Oh, what a crusher.
Yeah, and so I was telling this story to my brother Frank, who was a charter pilot, and telling him my story of woe about how my big dream film was turned down, and so Frank, later on, he was flying a client up to Vancouver.
Yeah.
He was telling this guy my story.
Yeah.
And the guy said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, it sounds pretty good." And this guy turned out to be a head of a conglomerate up in Vancouver, British Columbia. Marvin Judd was his name. He was the most pleasant man. And so he said, "Well, can you have him show me what you have?" So I flew up to Vancouver, and it was right around Christmas time. And Marvin had his family at his house. We had a nice dinner, and the lights were low, and there was a nice fireplace. And he said, he brings out his 4 children.
Yeah.
He says, "Tell them the story." And I went through it, and I pitched it like I had seen Joe Butler pitch stories. Give it some character and make it happen.
And this was a seasonal Christmas story.
Yeah, it was a Christmas story. And so it happened to be Christmas, and it was a very Christmassy mood. Anyway, bottom line is they loved it. It was called a Yellowstone Christmas. It wasn't called Santa and the Three Bears. That was a marketing thing that the distributor did. But Marvin bought it right there. He wrote a check to me to get it started right there and then. And he said if he can't get his company to back it, he'll do it himself.
This is the late 60s, right? This is 68?
This is 1968.
Now, you're no longer at Hanna-Barbera at this point?
Right. I left Hanna-Barbera I left right after I had pitched it. He was going to do it. And so I told Joe, this guy's going to... So he said, "Nah, you'll be back." So, and he's right, I was back later.
This was Uncle Joe telling you, "Okay, you go out and do your thing, but you'll be back."
Yeah, he did, and he was quite right. I was back in the 80s as a story editor on the Jetsons.
Oh my gosh. And
Imagine,
that went on for quite some time, didn't it?
It was 20 years later, you're doing a show, and the characters haven't grown any older or anything else, but the way they made them, yeah.
You weren't crazy about the. We'll get into
Yeah,
that, but
okay.
tell me about
But Santa and the Three
Yellowstone
Bears.
Christmas, or Santa and the Three Bears, as it's known today.
Okay, so I went down and I opened up a little studio and hired a few people, and a small crew, maybe there was about 10, and then
And you did the whole enchilada. You did the boarding, you supervised the animation.
Right, and did the,
You were the
I
director.
did some of the layouts, and then did, just generally went around and got it recorded and so forth. Hal, what was his name? Hal, who was the drunken Andy Griffith art show.
Oh, yeah.
And Jean Vanderpyle was the mother bear.
Yeah.
And
this is an hour special, right? This was
a half-hour special.
Oh, it's a half hour?
Yeah. And so anyway, we recorded it, and I went and made it, and it was, and when it was complete, because I had told Marvin that if we made the film, we can sell it. But
So you basically made it just with the financing you got from
made it on
Marvin.
spec, yeah, on total spec, and because I had pitched it everywhere, and nobody wanted it.
You went out and did it yourself.
So I did it, and then let's see, what is the next sequence? Made the film. Everybody's happy. Had a nice premiere up in July, up in Vancouver, hot as hell. They had all these kids here to come see a Christmas movie. Okay, great. Now
you have to sell it to a distributor.
Okay, so I went the rounds. I went to Warner Brothers. Well, I went to Warner Brothers last. I went to CBS. It was actually I'd gone to Chicago to a advertising agency, Gray Advertising, and was that the anyway? They handle Hallmark cards. I was trying to pitch it for Hallmark, and they were very enthusiastic about it, and I thought we had a sale, and something intervened. I don't know what. Where all of a sudden they just
backed off.
Couldn't find a time or some unconvincing reason, but so I went on pitching it everywhere else, and I pitched it to Warner Brothers, and they said, "Hey, okay, we can do that. We'll make it a children's matinee thing, but it's only a half hour long. We're going to make a feature out of it." I said, "A feature? I mean, well, we'll give you some money, shoot some live action, add a few more songs, and here's the money." So I didn't like the idea, but I had an investors here who, and so
You had to make whole, so.
right. So I took it. Great. Now I figured they gave us like I think $15,000, which wasn't a lot of money, but for that time it wasn't a little. And to shoot, add some more footage and add songs and so forth, and brought it up to like just barely qualified as feature length.
It was probably about 55, 65 minutes, right?
Just under 60 minutes. So then Warner Brothers gets purchased by Seven Arts, and they don't want anything to do with this thing.
Yeah, new management.
So I'm back on the road again, trying to find a distributor, and I wind up.
But by now you've got it at an hour, right?
Yeah, it's an hour, and I went down to Florida, Hollywood, Florida, and there was a distributor down there who distributed children's films and porno films.
There's a nice combination, porn and children's films.
I go into this guy's office, Shelley Shermer. He's got a one sheet of Thumbelina and a one sheet of some porno film. Same actress in both films. And
It's working both sides of the street.
so he said, "All right, we can do that." Well, he was just a typical,
Hard-driving, cigar-smoking huckster.
yeah, stereotype guy. They were like that. And so, all right, okay, we'll do it. He made a deal, and he gave me money to buy back Warner Brothers, paid them off, and gave me some left over for me, and then he went and printed up 100 prints. And on Thanksgiving in 1970, he let it out there, and it did $500,000 on a weekend with 50 cents a ticket, 75 cents max. So
he was pleasantly surprised.
Or he wasn't. I often wonder. Because I'm all exhilarated, and I call out my guy and say, hey, it's all happening, and, look at these figures, $500,000 on one weekend. And, great, well, where's our money? Oh, Shelley, where's our money? Well, we got all these costs here, a lot of money to distribute a film. So, it was impossible to get money out of him. And that dragged on for a couple of years, and finally I had to sell out my shares to the investors, and they eventually recovered all their money. But I was left to the wolves, and it's still out there now.
Gosh, you're not the first artist that this has happened to.
I shared the story with a lot of similar stories.
Even Walt Disney went through that.
Yeah, right. That whole distribution thing is a mysterious thing. They have it all worked out.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to break even.
Which runs up the production cost, because everyone has to make their money in production, because you're not going to ever see it again. If films would cost a lot less if the people that make them could share in some of the revenue. But,
they don't do that.
Dream. No, that's
they just don't do that. Okay, so Santa and the Three Bears makes somebody else a lot of money, but not you. And then your career went on for years and years and years. What were you doing after Santa and the Three Bears? Or were you?
I was very bitter about it. I just got out of the animation business.
You did? You got out of the animation business? How long did that last?
Till about late 70s.
Really? What did you do during all that time?
I tried making films on my own, fool's errand. But I actually spent all the money I had left to make a film that was illustrating music. It was the MTV concept, but
way ahead of its time.
Yeah, and it was widescreen Panavision. It had a 4-track quad was the big audio rage at the time, and I had a number of new artists in it. Donovan Leach, remember Donovan from this?
Yeah,
and a number of people that hadn't, quite made it all the way.
You were doing concert films before they were in vogue.
And it wasn't a concert. I would take their recorded songs and illustrate them.
Oh,
sometimes with live action, and sometimes with animation.
Yeah. And
so, but it had also an element that it was about marijuana. Was because back then it wasn't the hysterical thing now, but these people smoking marijuana in it and enjoying it, and that was a part of it, and that really hurt me in getting a distributor.
Yeah.
They did not want to get, and besides, they didn't believe that people would come to watch music. But the music trumped everything, I think, but not the case. So anyway, that busted me. Then I went back to work. I went back to Hanna-Barbera.
You went back to Uncle Joe's place.
Yeah, and they were redoing the Jetsons.
Right, and you came in as story editor.
Right.
So what was the show like because it had only lasted a couple of seasons back in the early 60s. And then,
I think it only lasted one.
Yeah.
But it was like you'd get 26 episodes in one season.
So they had quite a few that they recycled. But when you worked on this, so you were working on the second incarnation of the Jetsons.
Exactly, right. And it was not the same. It was vastly different. And they made a ton of them. based on a syndication formula that you needed, like, 52 shows to run
Yeah,
to a cycle.
Disney was doing either 52 or 65.
Right. And so, deadlines were difficult things to achieve if you wanted to really make the show sparkle.
Right.
It was like rushing them out. And so I wrote some of them as well, but then they would get shipped to Taiwan, and I said, what happened there? Because my boards, I tried to give them the best poses I could and everything else, and I totally ignored them. But they were being rushed out. So.
Well, you were on that show for the whole run. You did all
right.
16
That was, I think,
episodes?
1 year. Yeah. Then I went to work for Frizz over at
Frizz Freeling.
Yeah, I had worked with him when he was still at Warner's on a freelance basis, doing some of those superhero things that were. He had a funny superhero group over there. But then when they went out on their own, David and Frizz, and I went to work for them, and I was like a line producer on Daffy Duck special and Bugs and those characters when they would do TV specials.
Yeah.
So I would write and produce those things for them and direct them, and let's see, yeah, and then what happened after that?
And then
the business slowed down, and then I moved up to Seattle where my family is.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife both moved up there, kids all grown up. So and we were living up there, and I went to work for a gaming company who needed animators. I didn't know anything about computers, but I knew animation, and so they sent me to computer school, and I learned a lot about that, and then I started animating and.
The Lost Mind of Mr. Brain.
Yeah, right, yeah. That's one of them. That's the first one I ever worked on. I had a 27-year-old, no, he was younger than that, he was like early 20s, Ward McKilsky, who hired me because of my drawing, and he was a cartoonist, and he was a very skilled artist, and also he could handle computers and understood the whole thing really well, especially this emerging animation kind of computer technology. So Ward helped me, showed me how to do it all, and I would give him, and he liked my drawings and the animation that I would produce, and I'd also help him write the plots for some of these games that actually needed plots. And so that gave me a great training experience. And
so how many video games did you do altogether? And you were doing these up in Seattle, right?
Right, yeah. I only worked on a few of them. Some of them I don't even remember. There was a lot of them, but I can't.
That was all through the middle 90s? And
yeah, right. And so from there, and then Ward got hired by Disney, and they're Disney Interactive. So he went down there, and then he hired me, and I came back to Disney's for the third time. The second time, I think I missed.
Second time you came back to work on 101 Dalmatians.
No, the second time I came was on television for some stupid Saturday morning show called.
Oh, you worked for Disney Television Animation.
Yeah, right. That may not be in there.
Yeah, might
yeah,
not be.
Mike Webster.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
that was in the early days of Disney Television
right,
Animation.
Right, and from there I think I went to
Joe's place? Frizz Freeling.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm up in Seattle, and now I'm back at Disney.
So you moved back down here?
Yeah, I'm and working at Disney Interactive, so doing games again. Great, that was staying along nicely, and then all of a sudden, everybody's called together, and there's a mass layoff.
And you're right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I'm gone again. I don't know.
That's kind of a theme with animation people. Just as you think things are going well,
that's the time to watch out.
That's when the suits come down and say, don't worry, everybody's fine, and a week later you're laid off.
Yeah, it's those reassurances that let you know. It's
Well,
over.
and that's the funny thing that you say that, that's the one theme that I've told people over and over, where you have to start worrying is if the suits come down and say, don't worry, everything's fine. If they don't show up, you're okay. But if they come down and say, don't worry, everything's fine, start calling around for your next job because you're not going to be there much longer. Do you find that to be your experience?
Yeah, that is indeed. So, anyway, I think that was after that. I think I retired. Yeah, I didn't go. No, wait, no, I didn't. There was another. I went to work for a film company, Energy Productions, with the name. They shot time lapse.
Yeah.
And would build up a stock footage to sell to clients. I worked for them for a while, and they were purchased by Getty Images.
Oh, yeah.
So then I went to work for Getty Images as an art director and spent, several years with them. And then I retired.
And then you retired.
Yeah.
What year was that? That was not that long ago.
That's at least 10 years ago.
So about 2001?
Yeah, feels more like that, yeah.
Now I have one last question to ask you that I ask everybody. And this covers your inspiration in animation. What I want to know is, of the films that you saw as a kid or as a young man in animation, not live action stuff, although you could hit that, what are the 5 animated features or shorts or television half hours that really got your juices flowing and inspired you? Do you have 5 that, most people say, well, when I was 7 I saw Pinocchio, or, when I was this age I saw that. What would you say are the 5 pieces of animation that really inspired you to drive onward and upward in the animation business, or even brought you into it? Because you came out, how long were you in the Marines? You were in the Marines
3 years.
3 years. So, had you artistic aspirations prior to the Marine Corps?
Oh, yeah. I learned at a very early age how to get a laugh out of people with a joke. I used to read Collier's and Saturday Evening Post. They had those one-panel gags in there, and I loved that. I loved the short, quick humor. And I was raised mainly in boarding schools for impoverished, or they would call them homeless children now, and it was the hierarchy, social hierarchy was strict, but I was always up there with drawing these gags, and people would laugh. They were I imagine pretty crude drawings, but I was 8, 9 years old. I can remember when I first started doing that. Then I got better at it, and all the time I just loved to get laughs out of people.
But you did it with drawings rather than being the class clown.
Yeah, no, I'm not a very, socially, I guess,
You're shy.
yeah, I guess you call that, but call it that. But anyway, I like getting those laughs, and I think most comedians are just getting a laugh. You do anything for a laugh because it makes you laugh.
Right. It really is what you live for.
So
right.
anyway, that's how it just. And I was always doing gags, and even when I was in the Marine Corps, I had they sent me to. You go to boot camp, and then they evaluate you, say, what you're good for. Most of them were shipped off to an infantry as cannon fodder, but me and a few others were sent to school. And I was sent to the U.S. Naval School of Photography and Motion Pictures.
Oh my gosh.
Pensacola,
Well, no
Florida.
wonder that you got into motion pictures in a big way.
Yeah, I learned all about, the old way, how to expose film, and, but there was nothing aesthetic about it. You just record sound, expose film. They think in documentary terms, and that was about it. And photography, we learned that, film and so forth. So that was, a great training. So that when I got out of that school, I was sent up to Cherry Point, North Carolina, and they was assigned as an artist on the base paper. That was my job. But my other job was I was a boxer. I was on the athletic team. The Marine Corps
Oh my gosh.
had a great athletic program. Every sport there is, and big crowds that come out. But I was a boxer, and we would travel around various Marine bases and fight each other.
Put on an exhibition.
No, we'd fight it out. It were actual fights.
Boxing matches.
And I wound up going to, right here in Santa Ana, the Marine Corps championships.
Oh, yeah.
Boxing championship from the whole...
Santa Ana, lighter than Air Base.
Yeah.
Was up there. Yeah, I know it well. That's where I did my Navy Reserve duty.
Ah, right. Well, same
So I'm
outfit.
saying-
Marines are just part of the Navy.
Yep.
Yeah. I went to aviation school, though, too, before I wound up in photography school,
Yeah.
where we'd get in these big old planes, and they actually got the crank one up, and they shudder and shake.
Oh my
World War
gosh.
II planes. They were all tied down, but they wanted to give us a feel of what it was like, and so I learned a lot about aviation, and I grew very fond of that. And later on, I bought myself an airplane. I used to I used to pick up assignments. I'd be in Seattle and fly down here and get an assignment from even on.
So on top of your many other talents, you're a pilot.
Yeah, I used to love to fly. It's just, but now it's really tough because even then it was kind of, instrument flying, you had to pay attention, and but the skies weren't as crowded as they are now.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
Oh, yeah.
But I used to fly over to Catalina.
Oh,
they
my
got a little
gosh.
short runway at the top of the hill up there.
I worked for a guy, Willie Ratherman, that was a pilot. He used to
Yeah,
fly.
I know Willie was, yeah. I used to,
Old World War II pilot.
no kidding. See, I never knew any of that stuff. I'd be at the bar with him and Bolis Jones at the Alphonse's, and I'm asking all about stuff. How you know?
You know that Willie Ratherman was the vice commander of the Burmese airlift?
No.
He was the second in command.
Really?
And then he was an airline pilot when he got out of the service. And then he came back to Disney and became an animator again. He'd been an animator before the war.
Wow.
And
Look
then
at-
ended up
isn't
in
that
director.
incredible how people sacrifice, like Ted Williams, too, gave up a
Oh, yeah,
incredible
yeah.
career to fight a war.
I loved Willie. I worked for him for several years. But
Yeah.
anyway, so your five pieces of animation. Do you have?
I don't. I
You have
never
three.
thought in those terms. Like it's just like the total, total thing just sucked me in. I pick one out. It's like choosing among your children. That's the usual suspects. Come to mind. Pinocchio. I thought Pinocchio was really great. Even when I watched it again when I was 50 years old.
Well, but look at the Flintstones. You walked in on that from UPA. That must have been some sort of inspiration working with Mike Maltese and
Yeah, oh yeah, all those guys were just great. Well, I got a lot of, I don't know whether it's inspiration, but maybe more thievery from shows like Bilko,
Oh yeah, okay.
Car 54, Where Are You? I love that basic, it wasn't sophisticated humor, it was cartoon humor.
Yeah.
And I even submitted scripts to them once. Didn't get any reply, but people I submitted to wanted to work in.
Really? So you probably were supervising them.
No, I wasn't never supervising. I was never a supervisor. I was a story editor, but I don't know.
That's a
That's not the same
supervision
thing,
of a
is
sort.
it? Yeah. I never quite understood what a story editor was supposed to do.
Supposed to make sure the scripts are all on mark.
Yeah, and
All
that was
that good
often in dispute. What was on my, and that's where Bibles came around, and like just
All that stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, so the Flintstones didn't have a Bible per se. It
neither.
was just
I never saw a Bible in my 6 years there on any show.
so it was just you went in and pitched to Joe and started doing it.
Yeah.
That was the way it worked.
Right, and it would grow from there. Yeah, that's how they all began.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody there was familiar with these kind of stories. When Mike goes in and pitches a short to Joe they had made 3 or 4 versions of the same thing at MGM and Warner's. So, they knew what
They knew what they were
dealing with.
doing.
Yeah, just just a
They
different
know how to
character
hit the
doing the
marks.
same thing. Yeah. Nothing's new except what's been forgotten.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's a good place to end. Nothing's new except what's been forgotten. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Steve.